Go ahead, take a look at the fork on your table. Or maybe the one in your kitchen drawer. It's probably one of the most common things you own, right? Something we use every single day without even thinking about it. But what if I told you that this humble, simple tool has a past that's, well, surprisingly dramatic and frankly pretty scandalous? Yeah, let's get into it.
I mean, just look at this lineup. You've got dessert forks, relish forks, salad forks, dinner forks. It just goes on and on. The sheer variety here is a huge clue that there's way more to this story than just, stabbing your food. This isn't just a tool, it's a whole institution.
Yep, you heard that right. For literally centuries, that's exactly what people thought. The fork's journey from being a suspicious, foreign thing to a staple in every home, man, it is a wild ride. We're talking major controversy, a ton of class anxiety, and yeah, even accusations of being an instrument of the devil.
Okay, so to really get why the fork caused such a massive uproar, we've got to rewind. We need to go back to a time when dinner tables looked, well, a whole lot different. So what was life actually like before this thing took over?
Well, for most of Western history, your dinner toolkit was super simple. You had three things: your fingers, a knife that you'd use for cutting and spearing, and a spoon for anything liquidy. That's it. That was the whole setup.
And, the way people cooked back then made a fork pretty much pointless. A lot of meals were these one-pot deals, Big stews where the meat was cooked for hours until it was super tender. You could just pull it apart with your fingers or get it with a spoon. No fork needed.
But hold on, eating with your hands didn't mean it was a free-for-all. Not at all. There were actually super strict rules. Etiquette guides, like this one from Erasmus back in 1530, laid it all out. You had to have clean fingernails, you could only use 3 fingers, and whatever you do, no licking them clean.
All right, so into this world of fingers and knives, the fork makes its grand entrance. And let me tell you, it was not a welcome guest. Getting this thing accepted in Western Europe was a slow, painful process that dragged on for centuries.
And this timeline just shows you how incredibly long that resistance was. I mean, look at this. It was already common in the Byzantine Empire way back in the 4th century, but it takes another 700 years just to get a toehold in Italy, where it's immediately condemned. Then another 500 years before it gets to France, where people just make fun of it. In England, they held out all the way into the 1700s. Just wild.
So, why all the hate? Well, the opposition really boiled down to 2 things. First, you had the religious angle. Clergymen were saying its little prongs looked like the devil's pitchfork. And then you had the social side. Especially in places like England, using a fork was seen as way too delicate, too feminine, and suspiciously foreign. It was this unmanly Italian thing.
And this quote from a Venetian clergyman just sums up the religious argument perfectly. He basically said, God gave you natural forks. They're called fingers. So using this artificial tool wasn't just weird, it was seen as a direct insult to God, an affront to his perfect creation.
Okay, so if this thing was so hated, so evil, how did it end up in literally every kitchen drawer on the planet? What was the turning point? Let's dig into how the fork went from being a sin to a must-have status symbol.
Well, a huge piece of the puzzle was just simple design. See, the first forks were kind of clumsy. They just had 2 long straight prongs. They were okay for holding down a piece of meat while you cut it, but that's about it. Then they added a 3rd prong for more stability. And finally, in the 19th century, we get the design we know today, 4 tines with a nice curve. Suddenly, it was perfect for scooping stuff like peas. Practicality, It started to win people over. But the real game changer, the thing that pushed it over the top, came in the 1840s. That's when silver plating became a commercial thing. All of a sudden, forks weren't just for the super rich anymore. They became affordable. The growing middle class could finally get in on the action and buy a set for themselves.
But this created a whole new problem for the upper crust, right? If suddenly everyone has a fork, how are you supposed to show that you're better than them? The fork went from being this exclusive luxury item to something totally common. So the rules of the game had to change.
And here's how they did it. The silver companies saw an opportunity. They realized the fork itself was now a status symbol, and they went into overdrive. They started churning out this insane variety of specialized forks, not because anyone actually needed them, but because it created a complicated system of etiquette, a secret code that only the right people would understand.
And I mean, it got incredibly specific. A fancy Victorian dinner table became an absolute minefield of cutlery. There was an oyster fork, a fish fork, a salad fork, a snail fork, a pastry fork, the list just goes on. Knowing which fork to grab for which course, That became the new way to quietly show off how rich and sophisticated you were.
So that whole explosion of crazy Victorian cutlery has mostly died down, thank goodness. But the fork's legacy as this marker of class and, civility, it's still very much with us, in ways you probably don't even think about.
I mean, just think about it for a second. Most of us were taught from a pretty young age the right way to hold a fork and knife. Those little rules, they're basically the ghosts of the fork's past as a status symbol. They're leftovers from this time when it was all about separating the refined people from, everyone else.
And the most famous example of this has to be the traditional British upper-class style. The fork never leaves your left hand, and the tines always point down. You're not supposed to spear your peas. No. You have to balance them on the back of the fork, maybe using a little mashed potato to act like glue. Turning your fork over to scoop is considered basically shoveling food into your mouth. It's a totally clear and, let's be honest, completely illogical social signal.
So the next time you sit down for a meal, just take a second and really look at that fork in your hand. It's not just a piece of metal. It's this incredible symbol of a centuries-long fight over religion, what it means to be manly, and social status. And that leaves us with one final question to chew on. After all this history, did the fork really civilize our eating habits? Or did it just disconnect us a little more from the very food that sustains us?